The whispers followed Rebecca Morgan through the crowded streets of Millbrook, Massachusetts. Too bold for her own good, they said. A perfectly fine mill job, and she throws it away for what? But Becca didn't hear them anymore. With each step toward the train station, the weight of expectations fell away like autumn leaves. She'd spent 24 years trying to fit into spaces too small for her spirit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Today, she was boarding a train west, answering an advertisement from a Montana rancher who needed a wife. The letter in her pocket felt like a talisman, its promises of wide open skies and new beginnings written in a hand both strong and uncertain. She'd been rejected by 3 potential husbands already, all correspondence marriages that fell apart when they discovered her outspoken nature and unconventional ideas. But something about Nathaniel Blackwood's words felt different. "I don't need perfection," he'd written, "just honesty and courage." And for the first time in her life, Becca felt she might finally be enough, exactly as she was. The cotton mill's deafening roar had been Rebecca Morgan's daily companion for 9 years. From dawn until dusk, she stood among rows of clattering looms, her fingers quick and nimble, her mind far away. The overseer called her the most efficient worker on the floor, but nobody knew that while her hands worked mechanically, her thoughts soared beyond Millbrook's smoke-stained horizon. "Becca, you're daydreaming again," Harriet Wilson nudged her as they washed their hands at shift's end. The spring evening light filtered weakly through soot-covered windows, painting everything in a dull amber glow. "Mrs. Palmer caught you staring out the window twice today." Becca sighed, shaking water droplets from her hands. "I can't help it, Harriet. Don't you ever feel like you're just disappearing here? Like each day bleeds into the next until you can't tell them apart anymore?" Harriet's expression softened. At 26, 2 years Becca's senior, she'd already accepted what Becca still fought against. "It's not so bad. We have steady work, a roof over our heads at the boarding house. Most women would be grateful. And I am," Becca insisted, tucking a rebellious auburn curl back into her cap. "But grateful doesn't mean satisfied." They walked arm in arm down Millbrook's main street, past the brick facades of shops closing. For the day, their boarding house stood at the edge of town, a 3-story wooden structure housing 20 unmarried women who worked in the mills. It wasn't unpleasant, but the walls seemed to inch closer every year. "Mrs. Finch says you missed dinner again last night," Harriet said. She was quite put out. Becca bit her lip. "I was at the library." "Again? Reading what this time? Please don't say it was another one of those Western periodicals." Harper's Monthly had an entire piece on Montana territory, Becca admitted, her green eyes brightening. "The landscapes, Harriet, mountains that touch the sky, valleys that stretch forever, places where you can breathe without tasting coal dust." Harriet shook her head. "You've always had your head in the clouds, ever since we were girls." In their shared room at the boarding house, Becca carefully closed the door before pulling a small wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside, nestled among pressed wildflowers and newspaper clippings, lay a stack of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. "You're still writing to him?" Harriet asked, her voice dropping to a whisper although they were alone. Becca nodded, unfolding. The most recent letter. The paper was rough, not like the smooth stationery used by the Eastern gentlemen who had previously corresponded with her, only to reject her when they learned she was not the demure, quiet bride they sought. "Nathaniel Blackwood," she said the name softly. "He has a ranch near Pine Ridge, Montana, and a daughter, 8 years old." "A widower," Harriet noted. "Yes, his wife died in childbirth 3 years ago." "And what makes you think he'll be different from the others?" "Mr. Prescott from Philadelphia, who said you asked too many questions. Or that banker from Chicago who was horrified when you mentioned wanting to learn to ride." Becca set the letter down carefully. His words are different. Listen, I won't pretend that ranch life is easy, Miss Morgan. The winters are harsh, the work never-ending. But this land has a way of revealing what matters. I don't seek a servant or a decoration for my home. My daughter needs someone with spirit and kindness in equal measure. I need a partner who isn't afraid of hard work or honest words. He sounds direct. He sounds real, Becca countered, not like those men hiding behind fancy words and social expectations. Harriet sat beside her on the narrow bed. So you're going through with it? You're truly leaving Millbrook, your family? Becca's smile faltered. Her parents had passed years ago in the influenza outbreak of '76, leaving only distant cousins who occasionally wrote stiff letters inquiring about her matrimonial prospects. There was nothing for her here but the certainty of more years. At the loom, more evenings in this room growing smaller by the day, more whispers about the odd Morgan girl who read too much and spoke too freely. I've saved nearly every penny since I started corresponding with Mr. Blackwood 6 months ago, she said, reaching deeper into the box and producing a train ticket. I leave next week. Harriet gasped. So soon, but what if it's wonderful? Becca cut in. What if there's a life waiting for me that actually fits who I am, not who everyone expects me to be? Later that night, as Harriet slept soundly in the bed across from hers, Becca sat by the window. The moonlight cast silver patterns across the floorboards as she penned her final letter to Nathaniel Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, by the time you receive this, I will already be journeying west. I will arrive in Pine Ridge on April 17th. I understand. If seeing me in person changes your mind, it wouldn't be the first time. I speak plainly, think for myself, and have been told my laugh is too loud for polite company. But I also bring with me unwavering determination, quick hands that can learn any task, and a heart ready for a new beginning. If upon meeting me, you find I am not what you envisioned, I ask only for honesty. I would rather face a difficult truth than a comfortable lie. With hopeful expectations, Rebecca Morgan. The mill foreman received her resignation with a dismissive wave. You'll be back, he said, not even looking up from his ledger, when the wilderness proves too wild or your rancher discovers you're not the obedient type. Becca merely nodded, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing how his words stung. She'd heard it all before. Too headstrong, too curious, too much. She wondered what it would be like to live somewhere where too much might actually be enough. Her last evening in Millbrook, Harriet insisted on marking the occasion. They walked to Pearson's confectionery, where they splurged on peppermint sticks, sitting on a bench by the town square as dusk settled around them. I've something for you, Harriet said, reaching into her pocket. She produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. It's not much, but inside was a journal bound in dark blue leather. For your adventures, Harriet explained, blinking. Back tears. I want to know everything, the good and the bad. Promise you'll write. Every week, Becca vowed, clutching the journal to her chest. And you'll come back if it's not what you hoped? Becca hesitated. I'll find my place, Harriet, whether it's with Nathaniel Blackwood or somewhere else out west. But I can't come back here, not to this. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Becca wore her best dress, navy blue with small pearl buttons and a practical wool coat. Her trunk contained little, some clothing, a few precious books, her mother's silver hairbrush, and the letters from Nathaniel Blackwood. She looked around the room one last time, at the narrow bed that had held her restless dreams, at the small window through which she'd gazed countless nights, imagining something more. Harriet accompanied her to the station, their arms linked. As if to delay the inevitable separation, the whistle of the approaching train pierced the morning air. It's not too late, Harriet whispered. Becca squeezed her hand. "It's been too late for years. I've been leaving Millbrook in my mind since I was 16. As the train pulled in, belching steam and promise, Becca felt a curious lightness. Fear and excitement mingled in her veins as she embraced Harriet one final time. "You're the bravest person I know," Harriet said against her ear. Becca laughed, a sound too loud and free for the Millbrook station. "Not brave, just finally being honest about what I need." The train journey was a revelation. For the first time in her life, Becca watched the world unfold in constantly changing panoramas. The tight cluster of New England towns gave way to the sprawling farmlands of the Midwest, then the sweeping prairies, and finally the breathtaking ascent into mountain country. Each night, she wrote in Harriet's journal by lamplight, describing landscapes she'd only imagined, conversations with fellow travelers, the growing sense of possibility that expanded with each mile west. On the final leg of her journey, she shared her compartment with an elderly couple returning to their son's home in Helena. "First time out west, dear?" the woman asked kindly. "Yes," Becca admitted. "I'm going to Pine Ridge." "Ah, lovely country. Remote, though. What takes you there?" Becca hesitated. "I'm to be married." The woman's eyebrows rose. "A mail-order arrangement?" "Yes." Becca lifted her chin slightly, prepared for judgment. But the woman merely patted her hand. "My own daughter did the same 10 years back. Best decision she ever made, though the first winter nearly broke her spirit. Takes a special kind of strength to build a life so far from everything familiar." "I'm ready for the challenge," Becca said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I believe you are," the woman replied, studying her with wise eyes. "Just remember, out here it's not about being perfect. It's about being steadfast." Taitu, when the train finally pulled into Pine Ridge Station 4 days after leaving Millbrook, Becca felt as though she'd been traveling between worlds rather than merely across a continent. The small frontier town was nothing like the noisy, crowded streets of Millbrook. Here, the buildings were mostly wood, widely spaced along a main street that seemed to point directly toward the mountains, rising majestically in the distance. The April air held a brisk chill as Becca gathered her trunk and stepped onto the platform. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she scanned the small crowd. Would he recognize her from the single daguerreotype she'd sent? Would she recognize him? Then she saw him, standing slightly apart from the others. Nathaniel Blackwood was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered in a worn leather coat, his face weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his expression was unreadable beneath several days' growth of beard. Beside him stood a small figure, a girl with solemn eyes and braided blonde hair, half hidden behind her father's leg. Becca took a deep breath and walked toward them, refusing to let her uncertainty show. This was the moment that would determine everything. "Mr. Blackwood?" she said, stopping a few feet away. His grey eyes took her in, assessing. "Miss Morgan." His voice was deeper than she'd imagined from his letters, with a slight roughness to it. An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, he gestured to the girl. "This is my daughter, Lily. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Becca knelt down, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "Hello, Lily. I'm very pleased to meet you." The girl regarded her warily, but didn't speak. Becca hadn't expected immediate warmth, but the child's silence still felt like a small stone in her heart. When she straightened, Nathaniel was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You're not what I expected," he said finally. Becca's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "In what way?" He seemed to choose his words carefully. "You're smaller than I imagined. Ranch work is demanding." "I'm stronger than I look," she countered, "and quick to learn." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at her direct response. He nodded once, then gestured toward a wagon parked nearby. "It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch. We should get moving before we lose the light." As he loaded her trunk, Becca felt a flutter of doubt. His reserved manner was so different from the thoughtful words in his letters. Had she made a terrible mistake? Lily climbed into the wagon bed, still watching Becca with those solemn eyes. Nathaniel helped Becca up to the seat beside him, his touch impersonal and brief. As they pulled away from Pine Ridge, the silence between them seemed to grow. With each turn of the wheels, the landscape opened around them, rolling hills giving way to stands of pine, glimpses of snow-capped peaks in the distance. Under different circumstances, Becca would have been entranced by the beauty surrounding them. Now she struggled to find words to bridge the growing gap. "Your land is beautiful," she ventured. Nathaniel nodded, eyes on the road. "It can be harsh too. Spring comes late here. We could still get snow into May." "I'm not afraid of harsh conditions." He glanced at her then, his expression softening slightly. "No, I don't imagine you are. Your letters suggested as much." "As did yours," she replied, "though in person you're less forthcoming." A surprised sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, but close. "My brother Thomas says I save all my words for paper." "Where is your brother?" Becca asked, grateful for any thread of conversation. "He has his own place, about 5 miles south of mine. He comes by often enough, too often sometimes." From the wagon bed behind them came the soft sound of humming. Becca turned to see Lily drawing patterns in a small cloth-bound book, seemingly lost in her own world. "She likes to draw," Nathaniel explained, his voice gentler when speaking of his daughter. "Sees things the rest of us miss. She has her mother's eyes," Becca observed, remembering the description from one of his letters, something closed in his expression. "Yes." The rest of the journey passed in relative silence. As the wagon crested a final hill, Blackwood Ranch came into view. The main house was larger than Becca had expected, a 2-story structure of weathered logs with a wide porch and stone chimney. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods, just beginning to show the first haze of spring green. "It's wonderful," Becca breathed, unable to hide her admiration. Nathaniel's hands tightened on the reins. "It's work," he said, but there was pride in his voice. Every fence post, every board. As they pulled up to the house, the front door opened and a man stepped out. Though clearly younger than Nathaniel, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark hair, though worn longer, the same strong jaw, though his broke more easily into a smile. "Thomas," Nathaniel said, sounding resigned, "didn't expect you today." "Couldn't miss meeting. The bride, could I?" Thomas replied, his gaze moving curiously to Becca. "So you actually came?" "I'll admit I had my doubts when Nate started getting those letters. Thought for sure a city woman would change her mind." "I'm not from a city," Becca corrected, "and I don't change my mind once it's set." Thomas grinned. "I can see why my brother was intrigued. Thomas Blackwood, at your service." He offered his hand, which Becca shook firmly. Nathaniel was already unloading her trunk. "Thomas, help Lily with her lesson books. Miss Morgan must be tired from her journey." "Rebecca," she said. "Or Becca, if you prefer. If we're to be married," Miss Morgan seems overly formal. Something passed over Nathaniel's face. He set the trunk down on the porch. "About that, we should talk." Thomas glanced between them, then scooped up Lily, who had been hovering silently nearby. "Come on, little bird. Let's see if we can find that book about the mountain lions." As they disappeared inside, Becca felt a cold that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "You've changed your mind," she said flatly. Nathaniel ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "It's not that simple." "It seems simple enough. You've decided I'm not suitable after all." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." His jaw tightened. "Look, when we started writing, I was in a different place. Lily was having nightmares. The ranch was struggling after 2 bad winters. Thomas convinced me that Lily needed a mother's influence that I needed." He trailed off. "A wife," Becca finished for him, "but things have improved. Lily's doing better. I've hired 2 hands to help with the spring carving. I'm not sure now is the right time to introduce a dynamic." Becca fought to keep her voice steady. "I see. And when exactly were you planning to inform me of this change of heart? Before or after I traveled 2,000 miles? His expression darkened. "I sent a telegram to Millbrook 2 weeks ago, which I never received, as I'd already left for my aunt's home in Springfield to prepare for the journey," Becca countered. "Something I mentioned in my letter." Nathaniel looked genuinely chagrined. "I'm sorry, that was poorly handled on my part." "Yes, it was." Becca turned away, blinking back tears of frustration and disappointment. She wouldn't cry in front of this man. "Well, the next train east doesn't leave for 3 days, according to the schedule I saw. I'll need lodging in town until then." "You don't have to leave," he said quickly. She turned back to him, eyes flashing. "I didn't come all this way to be your housekeeper, Mr. Blackwood. That's not what I meant." He sighed heavily. "What I'm trying to say badly is that I'd still like you to stay as a guest for now. Get to know Lily, see the ranch, see if this life is truly what you want before we make any permanent decisions. And if I decide it is, then we can discuss. Do next steps." Becca studied him, trying to read the truth in his weathered face. The man before her was far more complicated than his letters had suggested, more guarded, more conflicted. Yet there was also something compelling about him, a quiet strength that matched the rugged landscape around them. 2 weeks, she said. "Finally. I'll stay for 2 weeks, as a guest, as you said. If at the end of that time either of us feels this arrangement won't work, I'll return east with no hard feelings." Relief softened his features. "That's fair. But during those 2 weeks, Mr. Blackwood, I expect honesty. No more changes of heart conveyed through belated telegrams." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Nathaniel, or Nate, as my brother calls me when he's being particularly annoying." Despite herself, Becca felt an answering smile tug at her lips. "Very well, Nathaniel. Shall we go inside? I believe you promised me a tour of my potential future home." And as he picked up her trunk once more, Becca gazed up at the house that might or might not become hers. Beyond it, the mountains rose in silent witness, their peaks catching the late afternoon sun. Whatever happened in the next 2 weeks, she knew with sudden certainty that she'd made the right choice in coming west. Because even if Nathaniel Blackwood ultimately rejected her as too wild for his orderly life, she'd finally found a place where the sky was as wide as her dreams. The Blackwood home welcomed Becca with the scent of pine and wood smoke. She stepped across the threshold, taking in her surroundings with undisguised curiosity. The main room was larger than she'd expected. A wide-open space with rough-hewn beams overhead and a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space. A long table with benches, several chairs arranged near the hearth, shelves lined with books and practical items. Sunlight streamed through windows that were surprisingly large for a frontier home, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. "Thomas built those windows," Nathaniel said, noticing her gaze. "Said a house should have proper light." "He was right," Becca replied. "They're beautiful." "Come," he said, setting her trunk down. "I'll show you to your room." He led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The upper level had a central hallway with 4 doors. "My room," he said, pointing to the first door on the left. "Lily's," he continued, indicating the one opposite. "Thomas stays here when the weather's bad." He gestured to the second door on the right. "And this one will be yours." The small bedroom was plain but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a dresser, washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. Like downstairs, the window was generously sized, offering a view of the mountains to the west. "It's not what you're accustomed to," Nathaniel said, his tone verging on apologetic. "You have no idea what I'm accustomed to," Becca replied, running her hand over the quilt. "This is lovely. Did Lily's mother make this?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. Our neighbor, Mrs. Dawson. She helps with Lily sometimes." Becca nodded, filing away this information. These were the details of his life she would need to learn, the neighbors, the rhythms of the ranch, the unspoken histories. "I'll let you settle in," Nathaniel said, moving toward the door. "Supper's at 6, nothing fancy." After he left, Becca sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was here in Montana Territory, in the home of a man who'd changed his mind about marrying her. For 2 weeks, she would navigate this uncertain terrain, trying to prove, what exactly? That she was worthy of being his wife? The thought made her bristle. She'd come west for a new beginning, yes, but not to beg for acceptance. With renewed determination, she unpacked her few belongings, arranging them carefully in the dresser drawers. From the bottom of her trunk, she withdrew Harriet's journal and sat in the rocking chair to write. First day at Blackwood Ranch. The land is more beautiful than I imagined, wild and vast in a way that makes my heart feel both small and expansive at the same time. The house is solid, built by hand with care. But Nathaniel Blackwood is not the man his letters suggested. He's withdrawn, conflicted. He's changed his mind about our arrangement, though he's offered me 2 weeks to... What? Convince him otherwise? Decide for myself if I want this life? Perhaps both. His daughter Lily hasn't spoken a word to me. Her eyes hold a wariness that breaks my heart. What has this child endured in her young life? Thomas seems kind, though something in his manner suggests he carries his own burdens. There's a story here that I don't yet understand, but I will. 2 weeks isn't much time, but it's enough to learn whether there's a place for me in this remote corner of the world. The dinner bell rang precisely at 6, a clear, resonant sound that seemed to echo across the property. Becca smoothed her dress, pinched some color into her cheeks, and descended the stairs. The kitchen was warm and fragrant, with the smell of fresh bread and something savory bubbling on the stove. To her surprise, it was Thomas who stirred a pot, not Nathaniel. "Hope you're hungry," he said cheerfully. "Nate shot a deer last week, so we're having venison stew." "It smells wonderful," Becca said, genuinely impressed. "You cook?" "We all do, more or less. Nate's the best with bread. I handle the stews and such. Lily's learning eggs." Thomas winked at the little girl who sat at the table, carefully placing silverware. "Aren't you, little bird?" Lily nodded, but remained silent, her movements deliberate and precise for such a young child. "May I help?" Becca asked. "Water. Pitcher needs filling," Thomas replied, nodding toward a ceramic jug. "Pump's just outside the back door." Becca took the pitcher and stepped out the rear entrance, finding herself on a small covered porch. The hand pump stood a few yards away. As she approached it, she heard the rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood. Nathaniel stood near the woodpile, his back to her, the muscles in his shoulders bunching and releasing with each powerful stroke. She filled the pitcher, taking her time, watching him work. There was a grace to his movements, an economy of effort that spoke of years of physical labor. When he paused to wipe his brow, he caught sight of her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the yard, neither speaking. Then he nodded once, acknowledgement rather than greeting, and returned to his task. Back in the kitchen, Thomas was transferring stew to a large serving bowl. "He's always been like that," he said, having clearly observed the silent exchange through the window. "Even as a boy, keeps everything locked inside tight as a drum." "His letters were different," Becca said before she could stop herself. "More forthcoming." Thomas laughed softly. "That would be my doing, partly. I told him nobody would respond to rancher seeks wife, must work hard and talk little." "You helped him write the advertisement?" "And the first few letters," Thomas admitted, lowering his voice. "But only the first few. The rest were all Nate. I think your responses surprised him, got him thinking maybe there was more to say than he'd realized." Before Becca could reply, Nathaniel entered through the back door, arms full of split wood, which he deposited in the box beside the stove. His gaze moved between Becca and Thomas, clearly sensing the abrupt end to their conversation. "Something amusing?" he asked. "Just getting acquainted," Thomas replied easily. "Miss Morgan, Becca, was telling me about her journey west." It was a harmless lie, but Becca appreciated Thomas's discretion. She had no desire to embarrass Nathaniel by revealing what she'd just learned about his letters. Dinner was a quiet affair. Lily ate methodically, her eyes occasionally darting to Becca with a mixture of curiosity and reserve. Thomas carried most of the conversation, telling stories about local families, the spring planting, a mother bear and cubs spotted near Eagle's Crest. Nathaniel spoke only when directly addressed, though Becca noticed how his expression softened whenever Lily whispered something to him. After the meal, Thomas announced he should head home before full dark. "Skies promising snow," he said, glancing out the window at gathering clouds. "Might have a late spring storm. You'd best check the north pasture fence before turning in." "Nate," Nathaniel nodded. "I was planning to." "I can take care of the dishes," Becca offered. "Lily helps with that," Nathaniel said, perhaps more abruptly than he intended. Seeing Becca's expression, he added, "It's our routine, but thank you." "Of course," Becca said, trying not to feel rebuffed. "What about Lily's lessons? Her bedtime? Story? I'd be happy to—" "We have our ways," Nathaniel interrupted. "You're a guest, Rebecca. There's no need for you to take on responsibilities." The message was clear. She was welcome to observe their life but not participate in it, at least not yet. A test, perhaps, to see if she could accept the boundaries he was setting. Thomas glanced between them, then clapped Nathaniel on the shoulder. "Walk me to my horse, brother. We need to discuss that timber contract." Once they were gone, Becca found herself alone with Lily for the first time. The girl was carefully gathering plates, her small face serious with concentration. "You do a wonderful job setting the table," Becca said gently. "I noticed how perfectly you placed everything." Lily paused, looking at Becca with those solemn eyes that seemed to hold more than her 8 years warranted. Then, to Becca's surprise, she reached into her pocket and withdrew her small cloth-bound book. She opened it to a page and held it out. Becca took it carefully. The drawing showed 3 figures, a tall man, a small girl, and between them, a woman with curly hair. The figures held hands, standing before what was clearly the Blackwood house. "Is this your family?" Becca asked softly. Lily nodded. "Is this your mother?" Becca pointed to the woman in the middle. Lily shook her head. Then, with deliberate movement, she placed her finger on the figure, then pointed directly at Becca. The meaning was unmistakable. In Lily's drawing, the woman was Becca. "Oh," Becca breathed, emotion tightening her throat. "You drew me with you and your father?" Another nod. "It's beautiful, Lily. You're very talented." The girl reclaimed her book. tucking it carefully back into her pocket. Then she returned to gathering dishes, her expression unchanged. But something had shifted between them. A small bridge had been extended across the gulf of strangeness. When Nathaniel returned, cheeks ruddy from the cold, Lily was washing dishes while Becca dried them, having silently inserted herself into the routine despite his earlier words. He paused in the doorway, watching them work together. "She showed me her drawing," Becca said quietly, not looking up from the plate in her hands. "She's quite gifted." Nathaniel moved to the stove, adding another log to the fire. Her mother was the same way, could capture a person's spirit with just a few lines. It was the first time he'd voluntarily mentioned Catherine. Becca chose her next words carefully. "Lily seems to see things clearly, people especially." He made a non-committal sound, but his gaze lingered on his daughter with undisguised tenderness. "She needs her rest. It's been an eventful day." To Lily, he said, "Finish up, little one. I'll read you a chapter before sleep." After Lily had gone upstairs, Nathaniel remained in the kitchen, seemingly at a loss for what to do with Becca now that their structured activities had ended. "Thomas mentioned a storm coming," she said, breaking the silence. Nathaniel nodded, moving to the window. The darkness outside was complete, but occasional flakes of snow swirled into view, illuminated by the lantern light. "First round of spring storms. They can be unpredictable. Is there anything I should know? Preparations to make?" He seemed surprised by the question. "We're well stocked. The livestock are sheltered. Water might freeze in the pipes if it gets cold enough. There's a pitcher and basin in your room if that happens." Becca nodded, committing this to memory. "And in the morning, what time does the day begin here?" "Dawn," he replied. "Earlier for me, there's always work before the sun." "I'd like to help," she said firmly. Not because of our arrangement, but because I'm here, with capable hands, and I want to learn." Nathaniel studied her, his expression thoughtful. "Ranch work isn't like mill work. It's not predictable or contained. Neither is life," Becca countered. "Yet here we are, managing as best we can." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or reluctant admiration. "Very well. Breakfast at first light. Dress warmly." As Becca climbed the stairs to her room that night, she heard Nathaniel's low voice coming from Lily's room. Curious, she paused in the hallway, just able to make out his words. The mountain lion moved silently through the forest, her paws making no sound on the soft earth. She was hunting, not for herself, but for her cubs who waited in the den, with hungry bellies and impatient cries. His storytelling voice was different, rich with subtle inflections, bringing the tale to life. Becca smiled to herself. Another piece of the puzzle that was Nathaniel Blackwood, stern rancher, reluctant correspondent, gifted storyteller. In her room, she added to her journal entry before climbing beneath the quilt. "He builds walls with his silence, but there are windows if you know where to look. In his eyes when he watches Lily, in his voice when he tells her stories, in his hands when he works, gentle despite their strength. There's a man here worth knowing, I think, whether he becomes my husband or not." Sleep came quickly, the exhaustion of her journey and the day's emotional terrain pulling her into deep slumber. She dreamed of open fields, of running without constraint, of a small hand in hers and a tall figure walking beside them. The howling wind woke her sometime in the night. Snow pelted against her window, driven by fierce gusts that made the glass rattle in its frame. Becca pulled the quilt tighter around herself, listening to the storm's fury. In Millbrook, surrounded by other buildings and people, storms were muffled events. Here, with nothing between the house and the wilderness, nature asserted itself, with unfiltered power. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Yes?" she called, sitting up. The door opened slightly, and Lily stood there in her nightgown, her face pale in the darkness, her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "Lily, are you afraid of the storm?" The girl shook her head, then pointed toward the window, then down the hall toward the stairs. "Is something wrong downstairs?" Becca asked, already reaching for her robe. Lily nodded, her expression urgent. "Your father?" Another nod. Becca followed Lily down the darkened hallway, the wooden floors cold beneath. Her bare feet. Downstairs, a lantern burned low in the main room. Nathaniel sat at the table, his head in his hands. His shirt was soaked through, snow melting in his hair. "Nathaniel?" Becca said softly. He looked up, clearly surprised to see them. "Lily, you should be in bed." "She was worried about you," Becca explained, moving closer. "As am I." "What happened?" "A north pasture fence came down," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Had to move the yearlings to the south field. One got stuck in the creek bed." Now that she was closer, Becca could see the mud caking his boots and trousers, the raw scrapes on his hands, the bone-deep weariness in his posture. "You're freezing," she said, noticing the way he suppressed a shiver. Without waiting for permission, she moved to the fireplace, adding logs to the dying embers and stoking them until flames leapt up. "Lily, fetch a towel, please." To her surprise, the girl immediately obeyed, disappearing into the kitchen and returning with a large cloth. "You should change into dry clothes," Becca told Nathaniel. He shook his head. "Need to go back out in an hour. Check on that yearling again. At least dry off," she insisted, taking the towel from Lily and offering it to him. "And have something hot to drink. I can make coffee." "There's no need. There is every need," Becca interrupted, her tone brooking no argument. "You'll be no use to your cattle if you catch pneumonia. Now dry your hair while I make coffee." A fleeting smile crossed his face, so brief she almost missed it. "You don't know where anything is." "Then Lily will show me," Becca replied, holding out her hand to the girl. "Won't you?" Lily took her hand without hesitation, leading her to the kitchen. Together they built up the stove fire, found the coffee and pot, and set water to boil. By the time they returned to the main room with a steaming mug, Nathaniel had removed his sodden outer shirt and boots and was sitting closer to the fire. "Thank you," he said quietly, accepting the coffee. To Lily he added, "You should go back to bed, little one." The girl shook her head, settling on the floor near his feet with her sketchbook. "Let her stay a while," Becca suggested. "The storm is frightening, and she was worried about you." Nathaniel didn't argue, just sipped his coffee, the tension in his shoulders gradually easing as warmth returned to his body. Lily began to draw, her pencil moving in quick, sure strokes across the page. Becca settled in a chair nearby, content to sit in silence. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside this circle of firelight, a fragile peace had established itself. Eventually, Lily's head began to nod, her pencil slowing. Nathaniel set down his empty mug and gently lifted her into his arms. "I'll take her up," he said softly. When he returned, Becca was still sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance. He hesitated, then resumed his seat across from her. "Thank you," he said again, "for looking after her, for the coffee." "It was nothing," Becca replied, "though I suspect you're not accustomed to accepting help." He gave a short laugh. "That obvious?" "Quite." She leaned forward slightly. "This life you've built, it's solitary by necessity, isn't it? Miles from town, unpredictable weather, constant work. You've had to rely on yourself. And Thomas," he acknowledged, "he's been there from the beginning, came west with me when there was nothing but a land claim and too many dreams." "Is that when you met Catherine?" Becca asked, daring to broach the subject that loomed between them like a shadow. Nathaniel was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, She was the school teacher in Pine Ridge, new to Montana, like us. She loved this land immediately, said it was the first place she'd ever felt free to breathe. The parallel to Becca's own feelings was striking, but she didn't remark on it. "How long were you married?" "5 years, he said, his gaze fixed. "On the fire? Good years mostly, until the end." "I'm sorry," Becca said simply. He nodded once, acknowledgement rather than acceptance. "After she died, I thought the best thing for Lily was stability. Same routines, same places. It's why I wasn't sure about bringing someone new into our lives." "Yet you wrote." "To me," Becca observed. "For 6 months you wrote letters that suggested you wanted something different." Nathaniel ran a hand through his still damp hair. "I did. I do. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are." His gaze shifted to her face, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You're not what I expected," he said, echoing his words from the train station, but with a different tone now. Thoughtful rather than dismissive. "In a good way, I hope." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I'm still deciding." The storm began to ease, the wind's howl diminishing to a low moan. Nathaniel stood, stretching his tall frame. "I need to check that yearling," he said, reaching in for his coat. Without thinking, Becca rose as well. "I'll come with you." He stared at her in genuine surprise. "It's freezing out there. The snow's a foot deep in places." "I'm aware of how snow works," she replied dryly. "I've lived in Massachusetts my entire life. We do have winters there. This isn't a social call, Rebecca. It's rough work in bad conditions. All the more reason for you to have help," she countered. "What if the yearling needs to be moved? What if the fence is down again? You can't do everything alone, Nathaniel, no matter how capable you are." He looked as though he wanted to argue further but thought better of it. "Wear my spare coat and the boots by the door. They'll be too big, but stuff them with rags. And a hat. Your ears will freeze otherwise." 10 minutes later, bundled, in borrowed layers that smelled of leather and wood smoke, Becca followed Nathaniel into the night. The storm had left a transformed world in its wake, pristine white blanketing every surface, softening the hard edges of fence posts and outbuildings. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the exhilaration of stepping into this wild beauty made her breath catch. Nathaniel moved with confidence through the snow, occasionally glancing back to ensure she kept pace. They headed toward the barn first, where he lit a lantern and checked on the horses, speaking to each in low, reassuring tones. He showed her how to fill the water troughs, explaining which horses were which, their temperaments, their purposes on the ranch. "That's Willow," he said, nodding toward a gray mare who watched them with intelligent eyes. "She's yours while you're here, gentle but spirited. Thomas thought she'd suit you." "You discussed which horse I'd ride?" Becca asked, surprised and oddly touched. Nathaniel shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "Seemed important to get it." "Right." From the barn, they walked to the south pasture where the yearlings had been relocated. The fence line was intact, but Nathaniel checked it meticulously anyway, showing Becca how to test the tension in the wire, what to look for in the posts. The injured yearling was where he'd left it, huddled against a windbreak with a makeshift shelter rigged over it. Nathaniel knelt beside the animal, checking its leg with gentle hands. "The splint's holding," he said, relief evident in his voice. "She should heal clean." "What happened?" Becca asked, kneeling beside him in the snow. "Stepped in a gopher. Hole, most likely. Broke her leg trying to get free." He stroked the calf's trembling flank. "She's a fighter, though. Worth saving." Becca watched his hands as he adjusted the splint, noting the careful precision in his movements. The same hands that had seemed so rough and work-worn at their first meeting now revealed their true nature, strong, yet capable of remarkable gentleness. "We should get back," Nathaniel said, rising to his feet. "Storm's past for now, but there's more coming." The walk back to the house was companionable, their breath clouding in the cold air, boots crunching through fresh snow. The sky had cleared, revealing a canopy of stars so bright and numerous they seemed to press downward. Becca stopped, gazing upward in wonder. "I've never seen stars like this." Nathaniel paused beside her, following her gaze. "Too much smoke in Millbrook?" "Too much of everything," she replied softly. "Too many buildings, too many people, too many lamps, too little sky." He was quiet for a moment, considering her words. "That's why I came west," he said finally. "Not for land or cattle or fortune, for this." He gestured toward the vast expanse above them, "for space to breathe." "Yes," Becca whispered, understanding perfectly. "Exactly that." They stood together under the immense sky, two small figures in a landscape of white and shadow, connected by a shared appreciation for the wild beauty surrounding them. When Nathaniel's gloved hand brushed against hers, it seemed as natural as the stars overhead. Back at the house, they moved quietly so as not to wake Lily. Nathaniel built up the fire again, while Becca removed the layers of borrowed clothing, hanging them carefully by the door. "Thank you," she said, warming her hands by the flames, "for letting me come with you, for showing me your world." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did well out there. Didn't complain once about the cold or the hour." "Did you expect me to?" "Honestly, yes." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "City women usually do." "I told you, I'm not from a city," Becca reminded him, "and I'm not usually anything." "I'm beginning to see that." He hesitated, then added, "Get some rest, Rebecca. Morning comes early here, storm or no storm." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Becca felt a curious lightness in her chest. The night had shifted something between them, not dramatically, but perceptibly, like the first crack in ice when spring begins to thaw a frozen creek. In her journal, she wrote by candlelight, "Tonight I saw beneath the surface, glimpsed the man behind the silence. There's warmth there and depth, and a gentleness that surprised me. We stood beneath stars so bright they made my heart ache, and for a moment I felt as though I'd found what I've been seeking all these years, not just a place, but a way of being in the world. Open, free, true. Lily still doesn't speak to me directly, but she sought me out tonight, trusted me to help, her father. And Nathaniel allowed me to step into his world, if only for a few hours. Small victories, perhaps, but meaningful ones. 2 weeks suddenly seems both too short and impossibly long. Too short to prove myself, to learn this land, to understand these quiet, complex people. Too long to guard my heart against the possibility that by the end of it, I might want to stay more than they want me to. When she finally slept, it was dreamless and deep, her body exhausted from the day's events, but her mind at peace. Outside, the mountains stood sentinel beneath the star-filled sky, and somewhere in the darkness, a lone wolf called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley like a promise. Morning arrived with gentle persistence, pale light filtering through Becca's window and birdsong replacing the storm's fury. She woke immediately, her body already adapting to the ranch's rhythms. The house below was alive with movement. Footsteps, the clatter of cookware, the creak of the door opening and closing as Nathaniel moved between house and barn. She dressed quickly in her most practical clothing, a sturdy skirt, warm blouse, and the thick wool stockings she'd purchased for the journey west. Her hair she braided and pinned tightly against her head. No frills, no pretense, just readiness for whatever the day might bring. Downstairs, Lily was setting the table, while Nathaniel tended to a cast-iron skillet filled with sizzling bacon. The domestic scene was so at odds with the stern rancher of yesterday that Becca paused in the doorway, momentarily unsure of her place in this tableau. Lily noticed her first, offering a small nod of acknowledgement before returning to her task. Nathaniel glanced up, his expression unreadable in the early light. "Coffee's hot," he said by way of greeting, gesturing toward a pot on the stove. "Thank you." Becca moved to pour herself a cup, careful not to disrupt their established routine. What needs doing this morning? If her directness surprised him, he didn't show it. Fence repairs in the north pasture, checking the herd after the storm. Regular chores, chickens need feeding, wood needs stacking. "I'll help wherever I'm needed," she said simply. Nathaniel transferred bacon to a platter, then cracked eggs into the rendered fat. "You ever worked with chickens before?" "No," Becca admitted, "but I can learn." A hint of amusement crossed his face. "They're meaner than they look, especially the rooster. His name's Lucifer for good reason." "I'll consider myself warned." Becca sipped her coffee, savoring its rich bitterness. "Did the yearling make it through the night?" "Seems to be, holding her own. I checked at first light." He slid perfectly cooked eggs onto 3 plates. Breakfast won't always be this substantial. Usually it's porridge and coffee. But after a storm, the body needs fuel, Becca finished for him. "We do the same in Millbrook after shoveling heavy snow." They ate in companionable silence, the events of the previous night having shifted something between them. Not intimacy exactly, but a tentative ease. Lily remained watchful, her gaze moving between them with quiet assessment. After breakfast, Lily disappeared upstairs to gather her books while Nathaniel pulled on his coat. "Chickens first," he told Becca. "Then I'll show you around the rest of the property so you get your bearings. Lily does her lessons in the morning." "Alone?" Becca asked, surprised. "She's good at keeping to her studies. Mrs. Dawson checks her work when she comes on Thursdays. Lily's bright, learns quickly. Outside, the world was transformed. Yesterday's storm had left everything encased in crystalline white. The morning sun turning ordinary fence posts and tree branches into glittering sculptures." Becca's breath caught at the beauty of it. "It won't last," Nathaniel said, noticing her reaction. "Sun will melt most of it by noon." "Then I'll appreciate it while it's here," she replied. The chicken coop stood a short distance from the house, a sturdy structure with a small fenced yard. As they approached, a chorus of impatient clucking greeted them. "They know it's feeding time," Nathaniel explained, retrieving a bucket of feed from a nearby shed. "Here, you scatter it while I collect eggs and check for damage from the storm." Becca took the bucket, carefully entering the yard as he'd instructed. Immediately, a dozen hens swarmed around her, pecking eagerly at the ground, their bodies vibrating with excited energy. She laughed, delighted by their enthusiasm. "Make sure to spread it widely," Nathaniel called from inside the coop. "Otherwise, the bigger ones bully the rest." She did as instructed, moving carefully among the birds, making sure even the smallest hens received their share. A movement caught her eye, a magnificent rooster with iridescent feathers strutting toward her with clear purpose. "I'm guessing you're Lucifer," she murmured. The rooster cocked his head, eyeing her with obvious suspicion. Then, without warning, he charged, spurs raised and beak open in a silent battle cry. Becca reacted instinctively, flaring her skirt wide and making herself appear larger. "Don't you dare," she said firmly, her voice carrying the same tone she'd used with troublesome children at the Millbrook church. To her surprise and evident amusement of Nathaniel, who was watching from the coop doorway, Lucifer skidded to a halt, considering this unexpected resistance. After a tense moment, he turned with offended dignity and stalked away. "Well," Nathaniel said, emerging with a basket of eggs, "that's a first. He usually sends new people running." "I've dealt with bullies before," Becca replied, feathered or otherwise. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "So I see." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity as Nathaniel showed her the property, the barn with its horses and milk cow, the equipment shed, the workshop, where he repaired tools and tack, the spring house where perishables were kept cool. He explained each aspect of ranch operation with patience, answering her questions without condescension. "The creek divides the property," he said as they walked. Along its banks, ice forming crystalline patterns at the edges of the flowing water. Good for irrigation in summer, though it floods sometimes in spring. Thomas's land begins on the other side of that ridge. He pointed to a tree-lined hill to the south. "How much land do you have?" Becca asked, trying to comprehend the scale. "Of it all." 640 acres, he replied. "Standard homestead claim. We worked neighboring claims originally, Thomas and me. When he proved up on his, I bought another section adjacent to mine." "And you've built all this yourself? The house, the outbuildings?" Nathaniel nodded, his expression softening with evident pride. "With Thomas's help. Took 3 years to get the main house comfortable." He glanced at her. "Different from Millbrook." "I imagine. In every possible way," Becca agreed. "But that's what I wanted. Space, purpose, the chance to build something real." He studied her face, as if searching for insincerity, and finding none. "It's not easy," he said finally. "This life." "I never expected it would be," she replied. "But difficulty and worth often go hand in hand, don't you think?" Before he could answer, they heard hoofbeats approaching. Thomas appeared on a chestnut gelding, waving as he rode toward them. "Checking on you after the storm," he called, dismounting with easy grace. "Fence down on your north section?" "Already fixed it," Nathaniel replied. "How's your creek crossing?" "Washed out again. I'll rebuild it once the water recedes." Thomas turned to Becca with a warm smile. "And how are you finding ranch life? Miss Morgan, has my brother put you to work already?" "I insisted," Becca said, returning his smile. "I've collected eggs, survived an encounter with Lucifer, and received the grand tour." Thomas laughed. "Lucifer? And you're still standing? Impressive." Your brother seemed surprised as well. "Nate's easily surprised when it comes to people," Thomas said, his tone light but his eyes shrewd. "Especially women with minds of their own." Nathaniel cleared his throat. "We should head back. Lily will be finishing her lessons." "I brought mail," Thomas said, producing several envelopes from his coat. "Stopped by the post office while I was in town. Nothing exciting. Supply. Catalogue. Notice about the spring cattle auction." He hesitated, then handed a small envelope to Becca. "And this came for you, Miss Morgan. Forwarded from Millbrook, looks like." Becca accepted it with surprise, recognizing Harriet's neat handwriting immediately. "Thank you." The three walked back toward the house, Thomas chatting easily about town news and neighboring ranches. Becca was conscious of the letter in her pocket, eager to read Harriet's words, but wanting privacy for the moment. At the house, they found Lily on the porch, bundled in a heavy coat, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing the mountains in the distance, her small hand moving with surprising confidence across the page. "Your mountains are looking good, little bird," Thomas said, crouching beside her. "You've got the shape of Eagle's Crest just right." Lily offered a small smile, the first Becca had seen from her. It transformed her solemn face, revealing the child beneath the watchfulness. "I can see the resemblance now," Becca said quietly. To Nathaniel, "She has your smile." Nathaniel looked startled, then gratified. Catherine always said the same. The moment of connection was brief but significant, another small crack in the wall between them. Thomas stayed for lunch, entertaining them with stories about his recent trip to Helena. "Town's growing faster than anyone expected," he told. "Them. New hotel going up, talk of a proper theater, civilization's creeping westward whether we like it or not." "Is that why you never remarried?" Becca asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Because you prefer being away from civilization? Thomas laughed, not offended by her directness. Partly, though it's also because the ladies in Pine Ridge are either too young, too old, or too married for my taste. He winked at Lily, who giggled silently. Besides, I'm not the settling type like my brother here. Got too much wanderlust in my blood. You're welcome to wander over and repair that section of barn roof you promised to fix last fall, Nathaniel said dryly. The brothers' easy banter continued through the meal, giving Becca insight into their relationship, the steady, serious older brother and the charming, restless younger one, bound by evident affection despite their differences. After Thomas departed, promising to return in a few days with supplies from town, Nathaniel turned to Becca. I need to check the east pasture. Won't be back until supper time. Will you be all right here with Lily? Of course, Becca replied, touched by his consideration. We'll manage just fine. Once Nathaniel had ridden out, Becca found herself alone with Lily for the first time. The girl watched her with those observant eyes, neither hostile nor particularly welcoming. Would you like to show me your drawings? Becca asked, settling on the sofa near where Lily sat with her sketchbook. After a moment's consideration, Lily nodded, moving to sit beside Becca. She opened her book, carefully turning pages to show landscapes, animals, and occasionally people. Thomas laughing, Nathaniel by the creek, and several of a woman Becca assumed was Catherine, though the features were rendered with a child's imprecise hand. These are wonderful, Becca said sincerely. You see things very clearly. Lily ducked her head, pleased by the praise but shy about receiving it. She turned to a fresh page and began to draw again, this time with Becca beside her. Eventually, Becca remembered the letter in her pocket. Do you mind if I read while you draw? My friend has written to me, and I'm eager to hear her news. Lily shook her head, absorbed in her work. Becca carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the pages of Harriet's letter. Dearest Becca, I pray this finds you safely arrived in Montana territory. The boarding house feels empty without your books stacked everywhere and your endless questions about the West. Mrs. Finch has already given your bed to a new girl from Worcester, quite timid and painfully neat, nothing like you at all. Millbrook continues unchanged. The mill whistle blows, the looms clatter, and people still whisper about that Morgan girl who ran off to marry a stranger. Some say you'll be back before summer with your tail between your legs. I told Mrs. Palmer you'd sooner tame grizzly bears than admit defeat. She seemed scandalized, which I count as a victory in your honor. I've enclosed a clipping from the Gazette. Mr. Prescott, your first correspondent, if you recall, has become engaged to the banker's daughter. A perfect match of money and mutual boredom, I imagine. You had a fortunate escape there. Right when you can. Tell me everything about your rancher, his daughter, the mountains you described so vividly in your dreams. Are they as magnificent as you hoped? Is he kind? Are you happy? With love and curiosity, Harriet P.S. I've taken to visiting the library on Thursdays. The new geography section has several volumes on the Western Territories. I find myself wondering what it might be like to see such places firsthand. Becca smiled at the postscript, sensing the first stirrings of restlessness in her practical friend. Perhaps Harriet, too, would someday find the courage to seek a larger life. She looked up to find Lily watching her, curiosity evident. In her expression, "It's from my friend Harriet," Becca explained. "We work together at the cotton mill in Massachusetts. She's curious about what it's like here." Lily tilted her head, considering this, then carefully tore a page from her sketchbook and offered it to Becca. "For me to send her?" Becca asked. Touched by the gesture, Lily nodded. "That's very thoughtful. She'll treasure it." The girl returned to her drawing, but something had shifted between them. The beginnings of trust taking root in the quiet afternoon. When Nathaniel returned at dusk, he found them in the kitchen. Becca was teaching Lily how to make apple dumplings, a recipe from her mother. Flour dusted their hands and the table between them as they worked the dough. He paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You're baking." "I hope that's all right," Becca said, suddenly uncertain. "Lily showed interest when I mentioned my mother's dumplings." "It's fine," he said quickly. It's been a while since." He trailed off, but Becca understood. Since the kitchen had held this kind of simple domestic scene, "We saved dough for a third batch," she told him, "if you'd like to join us." After a moment's hesitation, he removed his coat and hat, washed his hands at the pump, and joined them at the table. His large hands looked incongruous working the delicate dough, but his movements were surprisingly deft. "My mother taught me," he explained, seeing Becca's expression. "Said every ranch hand should know how to feed himself properly, whether there was a woman around or not. She sounds like a wise woman." She was. A shadow crossed his face. "She died before we came west, never saw what we built here." "But she gave you the skills to survive," Becca observed. "That's a powerful legacy." Nathaniel nodded, his expression softening. "She would have liked you, I think. She had no patience for pretense either." The simple compliment warmed Becca more than she expected. They worked together companionably, Lily between them, rolling and filling dough with sliced apples, cinnamon, and sugar. Later, as they ate supper and then the still warm dumplings, Becca was struck by how natural it felt, this improvised family around the table. Nathaniel was more relaxed than she'd yet seen him, telling Lily about a fox he'd spotted near the creek, describing its red coat against the snow with unexpected poetry. After Lily had gone to bed, Nathaniel and Becca remained at the table, nursing cups of coffee in the lamplight. "She's warming to you," he said quietly. "I haven't seen her take to anyone so quickly." "She's an extraordinary child," Becca replied. "Perceptive, sensitive. Like her mother." Nathaniel's fingers traced the rim of his cup. "Catherine saw things others missed. Beauty in unlikely places, truth behind careful words." Becca hesitated, then asked the question that had been forming since her arrival. "Why did she stop speaking? Lily, I mean. Was it when Catherine died?" A shadow passed over Nathaniel's face. "After," he said, his voice low. "She spoke a little at first, asked for her mother, asked when she was coming back. Then the question stopped and eventually all her words. Dr. in Helena says it's a kind of grief, too big for her small voice to hold." "And you? Where do you hold your grief?" The directness of her question seemed to startle him. His eyes met hers, revealing depths of pain he usually kept carefully hidden. "Everywhere," he said simply, "and nowhere safe." The honest vulnerability in his answer moved her deeply. Without thinking, she placed her hand over his, where it rested on the table. "Thank you for telling me." He looked down at their hands, but didn't pull away. "You ask difficult questions, Rebecca Morgan. The only kind worth asking, in my experience." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Perhaps." They sat in silence for a long moment, the connection between them both fragile and undeniable. Finally, Nathaniel withdrew his hand gently. "Dawn comes early," he said, standing. "And tomorrow we need to ride out to check the herd. Can you ride?" "Not well," Becca admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. Willow's gentle. She'll forgive mistakes." He moved toward the stairs, then paused. "We'll leave after breakfast. Dress warmly." "Good night, Nathaniel." He nodded, his expression unreadable in the shadowed hallway. "Good night, Rebecca." That night, as she prepared for bed, Becca found herself assessing her feelings with ruthless honesty. 4 days ago, she'd been on a train, heading west, filled with hopes and uncertainties. Now she was here, in this house on this remote ranch, gradually finding her place among these guarded, wounded people. Nathaniel Blackwood was nothing like the man she'd imagined from his letters. He was more complex, more careful with his emotions, more deeply scarred by loss. Yet there was something compelling about his quiet strength, his evident love for his daughter, his dedication to the life he'd built. And Lily, solemn, watchful Lily, with her expressive drawings and silent observations. The child was slowly letting Becca into her world, one small gesture at a time. 2 weeks, she reminded herself, that was their agreement. Time enough to determine if this arrangement could work, if this place could become her home, if these people could become her family. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a quiet determination. Whatever happened, she would face it with the same courage that had brought her across a continent to this remote corner of Montana territory. Morning came with a pink-gold sunrise that turned the snow-covered landscape into something magical. Becca woke early, eager for the day ahead. She dressed in her warmest clothes, including a pair of wool trousers she'd purchased secretly before leaving Millbrook, considered scandalous in Massachusetts, but practical for riding in Montana. Downstairs, she found Nathaniel already at the stove, cooking a simple breakfast of porridge and coffee. He glanced up as she entered, his eyebrows rising slightly at her attire. "Thomas mentioned you might need suitable riding clothes," he said, by way of explanation. "There's a spare coat and gloves by the door. They'll be too large, but better than nothing." "Thank you," Becca replied, grateful for his practicality. "Will Lily come with us?" He shook his head. "Mrs. Dawson is coming to stay with her. Thursday is lesson day." As they ate, Lily joined them, her hair neatly braided, clearly prepared for her tutor's arrival. She ate quickly, then disappeared upstairs, returning with a piece of paper, which she shyly placed beside Becca's bowl. It was a drawing of Becca riding a horse, her hair flying free, mountains in the background. The figure was small, but unmistakably joyful. "For luck on your first ride," Nathaniel translated, watching his daughter with evident affection. "Thank you, Lily," Becca said, deeply touched. "I'll keep it with me today." After breakfast, they walked to the barn together. Nathaniel explained the basics of saddling a horse, demonstrating on his own mount a powerful black gelding named Thunder, before helping Becca with Willow. The grey mare stood patiently, occasionally nuzzling Becca's pockets for treats. "She likes you," Nathaniel observed, adjusting the stirrups to fit Becca's shorter legs. "Horses are good judges of character." "Unlike roosters," Becca replied with a smile, recalling Lucifer's hostility. His answering laugh surprised them both, a rich, warm sound that transformed his usually solemn face. Fair Point, Mrs. Dawson, arrived as they were mounting, a sturdy, practical-looking woman in her 50s who greeted Nathaniel with familiar ease and regarded Becca with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the bride from back east," she said, looking Becca up and down. "Thomas mentioned you were coming, said you were different from what they expected." "In what way?" Becca asked, curious about Thomas's assessment. Mrs. Dawson's weathered face creased in a smile. "He said you stood up to Lucifer and asked questions that made Nate think. High praise, coming from Thomas." Becca glanced at Nathaniel, who was suddenly very interested in adjusting his saddle. "We'll be back by mid-afternoon," he told Mrs. Dawson. "There's stew from yesterday if you and Lily get hungry." "We'll be fine," the older woman assured him. "Been looking after Lily since she was in swaddling clothes. Go on now." They rode out, Becca initially tense on Willow's back, but gradually relaxing as the mare's smooth gait instilled confidence. Nathaniel led them along the creek, then up a gradual slope that offered increasingly spectacular views of the surrounding landscape. "It's breathtaking," Becca said, taking in the panorama of snow-covered meadows, stands of pine and aspen, and the distant mountains rising against the clear blue sky. Worth the journey? Nathaniel asked, watching her face. Every mile, she replied without hesitation. They rode in companionable silence for a time, Becca adjusting to the rhythm of horseback travel, Nathaniel occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining aspects of the ranch operation. Despite the lingering chill in the air, the sunshine was warm on their faces, and patches of ground were already emerging from beneath the melting snow. Spring comes late here, Nathaniel explained, as they crested a rise overlooking a sheltered valley where the cattle had gathered. But when it arrives, everything changes almost overnight. The meadows fill with wildflowers, blue lupine, Indian paintbrush, yellow balsam root, like nature's making up for lost time. I hope I'm still here to see it, Becca said softly. Nathaniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable. That would depend on both of us, wouldn't it? Before she could reply, he urged Thunder forward, leading the way down to the herd. For the next few hours they rode among the cattle, Nathaniel, checking for signs of illness or injury, while explaining to Becca how to recognize potential problems. The carving will start in earnest next month, he told her, as they paused to rest the horses near a sheltered copse of trees. Every day, from dawn until well after dark, checking mothers, helping with difficult births, fending off predators attracted. By the smell, it's exhausting work. Is that why you placed the advertisement, Becca asked, for help during calving season? Nathaniel dismounted, loosening Thunder's girth strap to give the horse a break. After a moment's hesitation, Becca did the same with Willow, her legs wobbling slightly as they adjusted to solid ground. Partly, he admitted, leading the horses to a patch of exposed grass. But it was more than that. After Catherine died, I tried to be everything Lily needed, father and mother both. But some things... He trailed off, searching for words. Some things a girl needs her mother for, or at least a woman's influence. And what about you? Becca asked. What did you need? He looked away, his profile strong against the winter-bright sky. Company, I suppose, someone to share the silence with. The simple honesty of his answer touched her deeply. That's not an unreasonable desire. No, he agreed. But it felt selfish somehow, like I was replacing Catherine. Is that why you changed your mind when I arrived? Nathaniel sighed, turning back to face her, partly fear, I think, of disrupting the life we've built, of letting someone new into spaces still raw with memory. He paused. Of finding I might care for you and losing you too. The unexpected vulnerability in his admission made Becca's heart quicken. Life offers no guarantees, Nathaniel. Not in Millbrook, not in Pine Ridge. We can only make the best choices we can with the time we're given. You sound like Catherine, he said softly. She had the same clear-eyed way of facing difficult truths. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. He stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. You're not what I expected, Rebecca Morgan. So you've mentioned, she replied, finding herself suddenly breathless. Though you've yet to explain exactly what you did. Expect. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Someone more. Conventional, I suppose, less willing to challenge me, less comfortable with this. He gestured to the wild landscape surrounding them. Conventional has never suited me, Becca said. As for challenges, growth requires resistance, doesn't it? Like a tree strengthened by wind. And this place, he asked, does it suit you? Truly. Becca looked around at the snow-covered valley, the distant mountains, the vast open sky. Then back to the man before her, his face weathered by years of sun and struggle, his eyes reflecting the same clear blue as the heavens above. More than anywhere I've ever been, she answered honestly. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, an opening. Before either could speak again, Thunder snorted and tossed his head, alerting them to movement on the ridge above. Alone, Wolf stood silhouetted against the sky, watching them with alert, intelligent eyes. "Don't move," Nathaniel said quietly, stepping slightly in front of Becca. "He's just curious." "He's magnificent," Becca breathed, awed by the wild creature's presence. The wolf regarded them for a long moment, its silver-grey coat gleaming in the sunlight. Then, with deliberate grace, it turned and disappeared over the ridge. "Are they dangerous?" Becca asked when it was gone. "To the cattle sometimes, to us rarely. They prefer to avoid humans when possible." Nathaniel's voice held respect rather than fear. "They mate for life, wolves. If one dies, the other might never pair again." The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on Becca. "Yet some do," she said gently. "Find another mate, I mean." He glanced at her sharply, then nodded once. "Some do." They remounted and continued their inspection of the herd, the encounter with the wolf shifting something between them, creating a space for possibilities previously unacknowledged. As they rode back toward the ranch in the golden afternoon, light. Becca felt a growing certainty that whatever happened in the days ahead, she had found something precious in this remote corner of Montana, a place where she could be fully herself, without constraint or apology. And perhaps, if fate and Nathaniel Blackwood allowed, a place she might one day call home. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural to Becca. Each morning, she rose with the sun, joining Nathaniel and Lily for breakfast before tackling the day's work. She learned quickly how to milk the placid brown cow named Buttercup, how to recognize when the chicken's water had frozen overnight, how to stack firewood so it would stay dry even in the unpredictable spring weather. Lily remained quiet, but grew more demonstrative in other ways. She would seek Becca out when drawing, silently offering her sketchbook for approval. She began leaving small treasures on Becca's windowsill. A perfectly round stone, a jay's feather, a pine cone, still sticky with resin. Each gift was an unspoken welcome, a childish but meaningful gesture of acceptance. With Nathaniel, progress came in smaller increments. He remained reserved, his emotions carefully contained, but Becca noticed subtle changes. He began to linger at the table after meals, telling stories about the early days of the ranch or explaining his plans for the spring planting. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him watching her with an expression that combined curiosity and something warmer, less easily defined. One evening, a week after her arrival, Thomas appeared at supper time with a bundle under his arm. "Package came for you on the stage, Miss Morgan," he announced, handing it to Becca. "From Massachusetts, by the looks of it." The parcel was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, Harriet's familiar handwriting on the address label. Becca opened it with curious fingers while Lily watched, wide-eyed with interest. Inside was a letter and several items carefully packed in newspaper. A small jar of strawberry preserves, a new hair ribbon, a book of poetry, and most surprisingly, a packet of flower seeds. "For your new garden," Harriet had written. "The station master says they'll grow well in Montana soil. Plant them and think of me when they bloom." "How thoughtful," Becca said softly, touched by her friend's gesture. "You could plant them along the south side of the house," Nathaniel suggested, surprising her with his interest. "Good sun there, protected from the worst winds." "Do you have a garden?" Becca asked. A shadow crossed his face. "Catherine started one, vegetables mostly, some herbs. I've kept it going after a fashion. It's not much." "I'd like to see it," Becca said gently. "Perhaps tomorrow?" He nodded, his expression softening. Tomorrow. After Lily had gone to bed, Becca and Nathaniel sat by the fire as had become their custom. These quiet evening hours had gradually evolved into a time of conversation when the day's work was done, and the night's stillness encouraged confidences that daylight might have inhibited. "Tell me about your family," Nathaniel said, breaking a comfortable silence. You've mentioned your friend Harriet, but little about your own people. Becca watched the flames dance for a moment before answering. There's not much to tell. My parents died in the influenza outbreak of '76. I was 17, no siblings, some distant cousins who write dutiful letters at Christmas, but we were never close. I'm sorry, he said, genuine empathy in his voice. That's a difficult age to lose your parents. It was, Becca agreed. But in some ways, it forced me to become independent sooner than most women my age. I learned to make my own decisions, to trust my own judgment. Is that why you were willing to travel across the country to marry a stranger? She smiled at his directness. Partly, though I never thought of you as a stranger exactly. Your letters revealed more than perhaps you realized. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. Even knowing Thomas helped write the first ones. Those were the most formal, Becca laughed. It was the later letters, the ones that were truly yours, that convinced me to come. There was honesty in them, directness, no false promises or pretty illusions about what life here would be like. And has it been what you expected, this life? Becca considered the question seriously. The land is more beautiful than I imagined. The work is hard but satisfying in a way mill work never was. And the people. She met his gaze directly. The people are complex, wounded in some ways, but fundamentally good, worth knowing, worth caring for. Something flickered in his eyes. Awareness, perhaps, that she was speaking specifically of him and Lily. And the isolation, he asked. The distance from town, from other women, from the comforts of civilization. I find I need those things, less than I thought, she admitted, though I do miss conversations with Harriet sometimes. Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his expression. Loneliness takes different forms here, not from lack of people surrounding you, but from the vastness of the land itself. It can make a person feel small, insignificant, or part of something larger, Becca countered, connected to the earth, the sky, the changing seasons. I've never felt more alive than I do here. He studied her face in the firelight, as if seeing her anew. You truly mean that? I never say things I don't mean, Nathaniel. Surely you've noticed that by now. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I have. It's refreshing. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling between them, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Nathaniel spoke again, his voice low and contemplative. 8 days, he said. That's how long you've been here. Are you counting? Becca asked, amusement coloring her tone. Perhaps. He met her gaze directly. Our agreement was for 2 weeks, for you to decide if this life suited you, and for me. To decide if I suited the life, she finished for him. He nodded, his expression serious. What are your thoughts at the halfway point? Becca considered her answer carefully, aware of its importance. I find myself reluctant to leave, she said honestly. Despite the challenges, despite your initial reservations, I found something here that I've been seeking for a long time. Purpose, connection, a sense of belonging. And if I asked you to stay? Nathaniel's voice was quiet but intent, not as a guest, but as we originally discussed, as my wife. Becca's heart quickened at the directness of his question. Are you asking? I'm considering it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of inner conflict. You're good with Lily. She's responding to you in ways I hadn't dared hope for. You've taken to ranch life with remarkable adaptability. And I'm what? She prompted when he hesitated. His eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable in the firelight. You're unlike anyone I've ever known. You speak your mind. You face difficulties without complaint. You see beauty where others might see only hardship. Those sound like qualities you value, Becca observed. They are. He leaned forward slightly. But marriage is more than shared work and similar perspectives. It's a partnership that requires... He trailed off, seemingly unable to find the right words. Affection? Becca suggested. Mutual respect? Physical compatibility? A flush rose on his cheekbones at her frankness. All of those, yes. And do you feel those things are possible between us? She asked directly, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to her hands, then returned to her face. I find myself thinking of you in ways I didn't expect, he admitted. Watching for your reactions, wondering what you're thinking, noticing details I shouldn't notice as merely a host. The confession, halting though it was, warmed Becca deeply. I've noticed things too, she said softly. The strength in your hands when you work. The way your expression changes when you speak to Lily. How you look in the early morning light. Something shifted in his eyes. A warming, an opening. Slowly, deliberately, he reached across the space between them and took her hand in his. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. I'm not an easy man, Rebecca, he said, his voice low. I carry my past with me, the good and the bad. I can be stubborn, too focused on work, too sparing with words. I'm aware of your flaws, she replied with a small smile, as I hope you're aware of mine. I ask too many questions. I speak too directly. I've been told my laugh is scandalously loud. His fingers tightened around hers. I like your laugh, and your questions, and your directness. Then perhaps we're more compatible than you initially thought. He nodded, his expression serious but his eyes warm. Perhaps we are? The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then, with careful deliberation, Nathaniel leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a question. Becca answered by returning the pressure, her free hand coming up to rest, against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. The kiss deepened slightly, a tentative exploration rather than a passionate claim, before Nathaniel pulled back, his eyes searching her face. I should have asked permission, he said, his voice rougher than before. You have it, Becca replied. Simply, now and in the future. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'll remember that. The next morning dawned bright and unseasonably warm. Becca woke with the memory of Nathaniel's kiss, lingering like a physical presence. Something had shifted between them, crossing from possibility into reality, though much remained unspoken. At breakfast, their eyes met across the table, a current of awareness passing between them that hadn't been there before. Lily, observant as always, glanced between them with curious eyes, sensing the change though unable to name it. I thought we might show Becca the garden today, Nathaniel told his daughter. See if she has ideas for spring planting. Lily nodded, a small smile lifting the corners of her mouth. After the morning chores were completed, the three of them walked to the south side of the house, where a rectangular plot of earth lay dormant under the spring sun. A low stone wall surrounded it, clearly built with care, the rocks fitted together without mortar but holding firm nonetheless. Catherine designed it, Nathaniel explained, his hand resting on the wall. Said every proper home needed a garden, a place of beauty amid all the practicality. She was right, Becca said softly, kneeling to examine the soil. It was rich and dark, surprisingly fertile for the high country. What did she grow here? Vegetables mostly, carrots, beans, squash, some herbs for cooking and medicine, and flowers along the border. I don't recall their names, but they were yellow and purple, attracted butterflies. Probably black-eyed Susans and coneflowers, Becca suggested. They're native to this region, drought-resistant once established. Nathaniel looked at her with evident surprise. You know about gardening? My mother kept a small garden behind our house in Millbrook, Becca explained. Not much space in town, but she made the most of it. She taught me which plants supported each other, which ones needed more sun or shade. She smiled, remembering. She said gardens were like people, each with their own needs and gifts, but stronger when properly arranged together. A wise woman, Nathaniel observed. She was, Becca agreed. To Lily, she added, would you like to help me plant Harriet's flower seeds here? We could put them along this sunny edge. Lily nodded eagerly, reaching for the packet of seeds. In Becca's pocket. Not today, Nathaniel cautioned. Ground's still too cold for planting. Another few weeks, when the threat of frost is past. He glanced at Becca. If you're still here. I'd like to be, she said simply, meeting his gaze. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Thomas appeared around the corner of the house riding fast, his expression unusually serious. Nate, he called, dismounting quickly. We've got trouble. Reynolds' boys spotted a mountain lion near their south pasture. Big one, already killed 2 of their calves. Nathaniel's expression hardened immediately. How long ago? This morning. They're forming a hunting party, meeting at the crossroads. In an hour. I'll get my rifle, Nathaniel said, already moving toward the house. To Becca, he added, stay close to the house until we get back. Mountain lions rarely approach buildings, but keep Lily inside just to be safe. I will, she promised. Be careful. He paused, seeming to want to say more, but instead nodded once before disappearing into the house. Thomas remained behind, his expression troubled. Sorry to interrupt your day, he told Becca. But a big cat near calving season, it's serious business. They develop a taste for easy prey. Keep coming back. I understand, Becca assured him. How dangerous will the hunt be? Thomas's face softened slightly at her evident concern. Nate's the best tracker in the territory. He'll be all right. Nathaniel emerged from the house with his rifle and saddlebags. He knelt briefly before Lily, speaking to her in a low voice. The girl nodded solemnly, then surprised both men by throwing her arms around her father's neck in a fierce hug. I'll be back before dark, he promised her, returning the embrace. Then to Becca, there's stew from yesterday, extra wood by the stove. Bar the door after we leave. We'll be fine, she assured him, fighting the urge to embrace him as Lily had done. Instead, she squeezed his hand briefly. Trust your instincts out there. Something flickered in his eyes, gratitude perhaps for her practical concern rather than feminine hysterics. He nodded once, then mounted Thunder and rode out with Thomas, their figures soon disappearing down the trail that led toward the neighboring ranches. The hours of their absence stretched long for Becca, who found herself listening for hoofbeats, despite knowing the men wouldn't return until evening. Lily seemed equally restless, moving from window to window with her sketchbook, drawing the same mountain lion over and over with increasing detail and ferocity. Your father will be all right, Becca assured her, smoothing the girl's blonde hair. He knows these mountains, knows how to track. Lily looked up at her, her small face pinched with worry that went beyond the normal concern of a child for a parent leaving on a potentially dangerous errand. There was something deeper. There, the fear of a child who had already lost one parent, suddenly faced with the possibility of losing another. Understanding dawned on Becca. You're afraid he won't come back, she said gently, like your mother. Tears welled in Lily's eyes, and she nodded once, her small shoulders trembling with emotion too big for her slight frame. Without hesitation, Becca knelt and gathered the child into her arms. Oh, sweetheart, your father is strong and smart and careful, and he has every reason to come home safely. You're here, waiting for him. Lily clung to her, silent tears soaking into Becca's shoulder. It was the most physical contact they'd shared, and Becca felt the weight of the child's trust like a precious, fragile gift. "I have an idea," she said when Lily's tears had subsided. "Let's bake something special for your father's return." "What's his favorite?" Lily wiped her eyes, considering the question. Then she mimed stirring something and pointed to the pantry where dried apples hung in netted bags. "Apple cake," Becca guessed. Lily nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. They spent the afternoon in the kitchen, measuring flour and sugar, rehydrating dried apples in warm water, grating nutmeg. Becca showed Lily how to properly grease the cake pan with butter, how to test the batter with a wooden spoon to ensure the right consistency. The familiar domestic activity seemed to soothe them both, giving purpose to the anxious hours of waiting. As dusk approached, Lily grew increasingly restless, returning to the window every few minutes to scan the empty yard. Becca felt her own anxiety rising, but worked to keep her expression calm for the child's sake. "The cake smells wonderful," she said, removing it from the oven and placing it on the counter to cool. "Your father will be so surprised." Just then, the sound of horses approaching brought them both to the window. Through the gathering darkness, they could make out two riders, Nathaniel and Thomas, both upright in their saddles. Relief flooded through Becca so intensely she felt momentarily lightheaded. Lily was already running for the door, flinging it open and racing across the yard despite the evening chill. Nathaniel dismounted quickly, catching his daughter as she launched herself into his arms. He held her close, murmuring reassurances against her hair. Becca remained in the doorway, watching the reunion with a full heart. When Nathaniel looked up and caught her eye over Lily's head, the warmth in his gaze sent a flutter through her chest. "Successful hunt?" she called as the men approached the house, leading their tired horses. "Got him," Thomas confirmed, satisfaction evident in his voice despite his evident exhaustion. "Big male," just as Reynolds' boys said. Nate tracked him up into the high country, cornered him in a box canyon. "You made the shot," Nathaniel corrected, setting Lily down but keeping a hand on her shoulder. Thomas shrugged. "Only because you drove him my way." Teamwork, as always. The men stabled their horses while Becca and Lily set the table for a late supper. When they returned to the house, the savory aroma of reheated stew mingled with the sweet scent of the cooling apple cake. "Something smells amazing," Thomas observed, hanging his coat by the door. "Lily and I baked," Becca explained, "to celebrate your safe return." Nathaniel's gaze moved between the cake on the counter and his daughter's proud expression. "Apple cake," he said, recognition and pleasure warming his voice. "You remembered, little one." During the meal, the men described the tracking and hunt in terms appropriate for Lily's ears, focusing on the skill involved rather than the more violent aspects. Becca listened attentively, noting the easy partnership between the brothers, the way they complemented each other's strengths. "The community's grateful," Thomas told Becca, as they enjoyed slices of the apple cake afterward. "That cat would have killed dozens of calves if left to roam, maybe even posed a danger to children, eventually. It seems strange to celebrate an animal's death," Becca mused, "especially one as magnificent as a mountain lion." "Life on the frontier requires hard choices sometimes," Nathaniel said, "balancing respect for the wild with the need to protect what's ours." "I understand," Becca assured him. "I'm simply glad you both returned safely." After Thomas had departed and Lily had gone to bed, Nathaniel and Becca found themselves alone by the fire once more. He seemed different tonight, the successful hunt and the warm homecoming having loosened something in his normally reserved demeanor. "Lily was terrified something would happen to you," Becca told him quietly. "She cried in my arms." Nathaniel's expression softened with surprise and gratitude. "She let you comfort her." "She did, I think," I think she's beginning to trust me. As am I, he admitted, his voice low. He studied her face in the firelight. You handled today well. No hysterics, no excessive worry, just practical support and... He gestured toward the kitchen. Apple cake. Becca smiled. Catherine's recipe. She made it every fall when the apples were fresh. It was always my favorite. He paused, a shadow crossing his face. I haven't had it since she died. Couldn't bear to make it myself, and Lily was too young to remember the proportions. She remembered it was your favorite, though, Becca observed. She wanted to welcome you home properly. Nathaniel nodded, emotion tightening his features. This place has been a house since Catherine died. Functional, orderly, but not fully a home. His gaze met hers directly. It's becoming one again with you here. The simple admission touched Becca deeply. I'm glad, she said softly. Every house should be a home, especially for Lily. And for you, he asked, his voice taking on a tentative quality that seemed at odds with his usual confidence. Could this be home for you, Rebecca? Not just for 2 weeks, but permanently? Becca's heart quickened at the question's implications. Are you asking me to stay as your wife, Nathaniel? I am. He reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady, not out of convenience or necessity, though those factors exist, but because in just over a week you've brought light back into this house, into Lily's life, into mine. Even though... I ask too many questions? She teased gently, emotion making her voice unsteady. Because you ask them, he corrected. Because you demand honesty and offer it in return. Because you see this life clearly, with its hardships and its beauty, and choose it anyway. Becca studied his face, the strong lines softened by firelight, the normally guarded eyes now open and vulnerable. This was not the man who had met her at the train station with cool assessment. This was a man allowing himself to hope again, to reach beyond grief, towards something new. I would be honored to be your wife, she said simply, and Lily's mother if she'll have me. Relief and joy transformed his expression. With gentle deliberation, he pulled her toward him, his kiss more certain than the tentative exploration of the previous night. Becca responded with equal fervor, her hands coming up to frame his face, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palms. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. We should wait until spring, he said, for the wedding, after calving season, when the meadows bloom. So I can see the wildflowers you described, Becca agreed, remembering his words from their ride. The lupine and Indian paintbrush. He nodded, stroking her cheek with his thumb. Though I'd like to write to the Reverend in Pine Ridge tomorrow, make our intentions known. Unless you need more time to be certain, I don't, Becca said without hesitation. I've known since I saw you standing on that platform in Pine Ridge that there was something honest and true here worth discovering. Everything since has only confirmed that feeling. Even my initial reluctance? He asked, a trace of regret in his voice. Even that, she assured him. It showed me you took marriage seriously, that you wouldn't enter into it lightly or for convenience alone, that you considered Lily's well-being paramount. He kissed her again, slower this time, as if memorizing the sensation. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. I never expected to feel this way again. After Catherine died, I thought that part of me was finished. The heart has remarkable capacity for renewal, Becca said softly, like your Montana meadows after the long winter. They sat together by the fire until the logs burned down to embers, speaking of practical matters, where they would be married, how they would tell Lily, what changes might come with spring, and their new life together. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation ran a current of deeper connection, of mutual understanding that transcended words. Later, as Becca prepared for bed, she heard a soft knock at her door. Opening it, she found Lily standing there in her nightgown, sketchbook in hand. "What is it, sweetheart?" Becca asked, kneeling to the child's level. "Can't sleep." Lily nodded, then opened her sketchbook to a freshly completed drawing. It showed 3 figures standing before the Blackwood house: a tall man, a woman with curly hair, and between them, a small girl. All 3 were smiling, their hands linked together. Above them, written in careful, childish script, were the words, "Our family." Tears pricked Becca's eyes as she looked from the drawing to Lily's hopeful face. "Is this us?" she asked gently. "You and your father and me?" Lily nodded, then pointed to the word family and tilted her head in a silent question. "Yes," Becca whispered, understanding perfectly. "If you want me to be part of your family, I would love that more than anything in the world." Lily launched herself into Becca's arms, hugging her fiercely. And then, so softly it was almost inaudible, Becca heard the whispered word, "Mama." It was the first word Lily had spoken aloud since Becca's arrival, perhaps the first in months. The simple, precious gift of that single word filled Becca's heart to overflowing. "Oh, Lily," she murmured against the child's hair, "my dear, brave girl." When Nathaniel found them moments later, drawn by the sound of their voices, he stood transfixed in the hallway, watching as his daughter, silent for so long, nestled in Becca's embrace, her small voice quietly recounting the features of her drawing. Becca looked up, meeting his gaze over Lily's head. The naked emotion in his eyes reflected her own: wonder, gratitude, and the profound recognition that something broken was beginning to heal. In that moment, standing in the hallway of what would soon be her home, cradling this child who had offered her the precious gift of Mama, meeting the gaze of the man who had opened his guarded heart to love again, Becca knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world. Not in the crowded mill town of her birth, not in the safe and familiar rhythms of a predictable life, but here, in this remote corner of Montana territory, with these 2 wounded souls who were becoming her family. Here, where the mountains touched the sky and the wind carried the promise of wildflowers yet to bloom. Spring arrived in Montana territory with breathtaking suddenness. One week, the world was muted in browns and grays, and the next, vibrant. Green carpeted the meadows, dotted with wildflowers in every hue imaginable. The creek swelled with snowmelt, its gentle babble a constant companion to life at Blackwood Ranch. For Becca, the ranch had transformed from an uncertain destination to a beloved home. 6 weeks had passed since Nathaniel had asked her to be his wife, and in that time, the transition from guest to family member had been remarkably smooth, as if she had always belonged there, just waiting to find her way. Lily had continued to speak, her voice growing stronger with each passing day. Words came hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence as she rediscovered the joy of communication. Her first sentences were directed at Becca, simple requests or observations that gradually expanded into stories and questions. The day she called Nathaniel Papa again for the first time, he had turned away briefly, unable to hide the emotion that overwhelmed him. Now, as Becca stood at the garden's edge, surveying the neat rows of vegetables and herbs she and Lily had planted, she marveled at how much had changed. Harriet's flower seeds had sprouted along the border, their tender green shoots promising future blooms. The stone wall had been carefully repaired where winter frost had shifted some rocks, Nathaniel working alongside Becca one warm afternoon, their hands occasionally brushing in a way that still sent pleasant shivers up her spine. "It looks fine," Nathaniel's voice came from behind her. He stood at the garden gate, hat in hand, his tall frame silhouetted against the brilliant blue sky. The weeks of spring work had tanned his face, lightened his hair with sun streaks, and somehow softened the habitual tension he'd carried when she first arrived. "The beans are coming up nicely," Becca replied, smiling as he crossed the garden to stand beside her. "And Lily's sunflowers are already reaching for the sky. Like their planter," he observed fondly. "She's grown an inch since winter. I'm certain of it." "Children tend to do that when they're happy," Becca said, her heart warming at the thought of Lily's transformation. From a silent, solemn child to a girl who now laughed and sang as she collected eggs or helped with baking. Nathaniel's arm slipped around her waist, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, his voice gentle. Tomorrow? Their wedding day, a simple ceremony at the small church in Pine Ridge, with Thomas as best man, Lily as flower girl, and a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Not the grand society wedding of Millbrook expectations, but exactly what Becca wanted. Honest, meaningful, surrounded by the community that had gradually welcomed her as one of their own. "Not nervous," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Just reflective, thinking about how different my life is now from what I imagined in Millbrook. Better in every way that matters. Even with the mud and the chickens and Lucifer's continuing campaign against you," he teased. Becca laughed. The rooster had established an uneasy truce with her, though he still puffed up impressively whenever she entered his domain. "Even with all that, perhaps especially with all that." Nathaniel turned her gently to face him, his expression growing serious. "I have something for you. A wedding gift, though I wanted to give it to you privately, before tomorrow's festivities." From his pocket, he withdrew a small box wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with string. Becca took it with curious fingers, carefully unwrapping it to reveal a wooden box, beautifully carved with mountain scenes and wildflowers. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the intricate details with her fingertip. "Open it," he urged, softly. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a ring, a delicate gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire that caught the sunlight in brilliant blue facets. "Nathaniel," she whispered, deeply touched. "It's exquisite." "It was my grandmother's," he explained, taking the ring from its box. "She crossed the plains by wagon train, helped establish one of the first homesteads in this territory. My grandfather gave it to her on their 30th anniversary, after decades of struggle and success together. He held it between them, the gem glinting like a captured piece of Montana sky. I thought it fitting for a woman of similar courage and determination." Tears pricked Becca's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. "I'll treasure it," she promised, "and the legacy it represents." His kiss was tender, filled with promise and shared understanding. When they parted, he kept her close, their foreheads touching in the intimate gesture that had become theirs. "I have something for you too," Becca admitted, "though it's not nearly as precious." She led him to the porch, where a package, wrapped in brown paper, leaned against the wall. "I asked Thomas to bring it from town last week. It's finally ready." Nathaniel unwrapped it carefully, revealing a framed portrait, a charcoal drawing of Lily sitting on the porch steps, her face alight with laughter, her hair caught by the wind. The artist had captured not just her features, but her spirit, the joy that had once been hidden, now radiating from every line. "Mrs. Dawson's niece drew it from the photograph Thomas took at Easter," Becca explained. I thought we should start our married life with reminders of what matters most." Nathaniel stared at the portrait, emotion evident in his face. "It's perfect," he said, his voice rough. "Exactly how I want to remember her childhood. Not the silent years, but this, her true self emerging again." "There will be more portraits," Becca promised, as our family grows, a visual record of our life together. He set the drawing carefully on the porch swing, then gathered her into his arms. Have I told you today how grateful I am that you answered my advertisement? That you were stubborn enough to come west despite my telegram? That you saw through my defenses to the man beneath? Not in those exact words, she teased, looping her arms around his neck. Then let me remedy that, he murmured against her lips. Thank you, Rebecca Morgan, soon to be Blackwood, for bringing spring back to this ranch and to my heart. Their kiss deepened, interrupted only by the sound of running footsteps and Lily's excited voice calling from the yard. Papa! Becca, Uncle Thomas is here with the wagon, and he's brought Aunt Harriet. They broke apart in surprise, turning to see Thomas helping a woman down from a wagon. A woman whose practical traveling clothes couldn't disguise her delicate features or the nervous excitement in her posture. Harriet! Becca gasped, scarcely believing her eyes. She rushed down the porch steps, crossing the yard in record time to embrace her dearest friend. Surprise! Harriet laughed, returning the hug fiercely. Your Mr. Blackwood arranged it all, sent the train fare and everything. Said no bride should be without her closest friend on her wedding day. Becca turned to Nathaniel, who had followed at a more measured pace, Lily's hand in his. You did this? When? How? After your last letter from her arrived, he explained. The one where she mentioned visiting the library to read about Montana Territory. Thomas helped with the arrangements. Thomas grinned, clearly pleased with himself. Miss Wilson has been full of questions about Pine Ridge the entire journey from the station. Remarkably curious about our little corner of the territory. Something in his tone made Becca glance sharply between him and Harriet, noting the faint blush on her friend's cheeks. An interesting development, but one to be explored later. Come inside, she urged, linking her arm through Harriet's. You must be exhausted from the journey. I want to hear everything about Millbrook, and you must meet Lily properly. She's been helping me plant the flowers you sent, and they're sprouting beautifully. The house welcomed them with familiar warmth, no longer just a structure of logs and stone, but a true home filled with evidence of the life they'd begun building together. Lily's drawings adorned the walls alongside practical items. Fresh curtains that Becca had sewn framed the windows. A quilt in progress lay folded on the chair by the fire, its pattern incorporating elements of both Montana landscape and traditional New England designs. As they settled around the table, Nathaniel brewing coffee, Thomas regaling them with tales of their journey from the station, Lily showing Harriet her latest drawings, Becca felt a profound sense of completion. The circle of her life had expanded to include this place, these people, this purpose. Later that evening, after supper had been cleared and Lily had gone to bed, exhausted from the excitement, the adults sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. Harriet and Thomas sat on the steps, deep in conversation about the changes coming to Montana Territory with the railroad's expansion. Nathaniel and Becca occupied the swing, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. Happy? He asked quietly, for her ears alone. Completely, she assured him, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I was just thinking about that advertisement in the Fairfield Gazette, how different my life would be if I hadn't seen it that day. I almost didn't place it, Nathaniel admitted. Thomas practically wrote it himself, mailed it before I could. Change my mind. Remind me to thank him properly, Becca said with a smile. I think Miss Wilson is doing that quite effectively, Nathaniel observed, nodding toward the pair on the steps, now sitting noticeably closer together, their voices low and intimate. Becca laughed softly. I had a feeling they might get along. Harriet always said she preferred straightforward men to the polished gentlemen of Millbrook society. A trait you share, he noted, pressing a kiss to her temple. One of many, she agreed, though I believe I've proven to be the wilder spirit between us. To my eternal gratitude, Nathaniel murmured, though I should warn you, I have plans to match your wildness once we're properly married. His suggestive tone sent a pleasant shiver through her. Promises, promises, Mr. Blackwood. Their quiet laughter blended with the evening sounds, creek water bubbling over stones, nightbirds calling from the trees, the distant lowing of cattle in the meadows, sounds of the land that had become home, the backdrop to a life that had once seemed an impossible dream. Tomorrow would bring the ceremony that would formalize what they already knew in their hearts, that they belonged together, that their separate journeys had led precisely where they were meant to. But tonight was for this peaceful moment of anticipation, of gratitude for paths that had converged against all odds. Becca gazed up at the vast Montana sky, stars now scattered like diamonds across its velvet darkness. She thought of the Millbrook mill with its deafening looms, the narrow streets with their predictable rhythms, the life of quiet desperation she might have led had she not found the courage to reach for something more. Instead, she had found her way to this porch, this man, this family being forged from love and choice rather than convention. To Lily, who had trusted her enough to break her silence. To a community that valued strength of character over social polish. To a purpose that challenged and fulfilled her every day. The advertisement had promised a life of hard work and honest words. It had delivered that and so much more. The wild, beautiful freedom of being truly seen and accepted, of finding home not in a place but in the hearts that welcomed her exactly as she was. As if reading her thoughts, Nathaniel squeezed her hand gently, the sapphire ring catching starlight as their fingers intertwined. No words were needed between them now. Just the shared certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, with the same courage that had brought them to this perfect moment under the Montana stars. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.